Welcome, everyone, back to the Infinite Jurisdiction podcast. It's your host, Gonzalo, for another weekly update of my law school journey. This is the third week coming on strong. This podcast is, I think, 3 days late. I couldn't fit it in to my Thursday schedule as I normally do. So I apologize for it being late, but it's Sunday and it's been an eventful week, so let's get into it. This is structured as it normally is into 3 parts. The first part is just catching up on what I am doing this week. Second has to do with like a general law school theme. And lastly, just some intellectual, quasi-philosophical ideas about the law that I'm thinking about during this week that I wanted to share. So let's get into it. The first part, what's happening this week. So as I've already hinted to, it's been an interesting week filled with mostly disappointment. I guess let's get into that. I applied for a clinic for this coming fall, and I also applied for a position as an editor or just a staff member for my school's law journal. And I received 2 letters that regret to inform me that I'm not up to stuff on that. So that was disappointing. Kind of thing to go through this week, but you quickly realize in any area of life, really, but I guess in law school it intensifies, just having to deal with rejection and mistakes and failures, and the only response that is productive is to learn what you did wrong and improve. I hinted toward this last week. I talked about it a lot last week, but that's where my mind is. Of course, you never like to be disappointed and get those we regret to inform you letters, which I received a lot. I think you get those a lot if you're in academia because you're applying to so many things like scholarships or schools or programs or volunteer positions, or externships, whatever. So if you've been in at university for a while and grad school, you kind of get used to receiving those letters. At any rate, that's kind of what's been going on this week. I also started a job with my school that looks like it's going to be an interesting type of work, but also going to benefit me financially. So excited about that. It's always, I think, important to have things that you're, excited about in the future. It's a lot of joy in life. It's about anticipation. I think the neuroendocrinologist Robert Sapolsky makes this point well. It's not about the dopamine release, like when you get something, it's the anticipation of getting the reward. So it's important to look forward to things, I think. So that's something I look forward to. But moving to the second part, and I kind of touched on this already. I was eager to get into it, but it was just dealing more broadly with like the idea of failure, which I talked about last week, but it really cannot be emphasized enough to incoming students who want to study and practice law. The level of grit and willingness to overcome adversity that comes along with any form of success in this career, and it's not like catastrophic failures. It's really minor mistakes or small failures, disappointments, and you really have to pay attention to not just the big ones, but also these medium to small size ones that almost seem trivial, but also require their level of response to them and trying to improve yourself. Getting a bad grade on a midterm is kind of small in comparison to maybe being rejected for an internship you really were hoping to get. But even though it's small, it still requires its appropriate level of reaction to it, to the willingness to improve for it. So you have to take all of these things in your stride, and I just stress you will have to I'm trying to think of how to systematically go about this. This is different from last week, where here I just want to speak a little bit to like the experiential component of this, like what it is to deal with failure, like psychologically. I'm sure a lot of students in law school are, type A personalities, and they're hard on themselves, and they're self-critical and self-deprecating, and there's a tendency to devalue what it is you're doing in order to grow, to improve. And it's a useful mechanism, I think, most of the time. But I want to emphasize that the self-criticism, the self-deprecation, the devaluation of one's abilities is good only to a point. And I had to learn this the hard way in my 1L year, where I was very hard on myself. And if there's no equal opposite reaction to that self-criticism, it's going to end in a bad mental health. And by bad mental health, I don't necessarily mean that you'll fall into depression or suffer anxiety or what have you. Oftentimes, it will lead to those things, but more so just not having healthy thoughts. In 2021, 2022, we have a roughly good idea of what it means to have a good physical health program, right? If you want to get healthy, you have to diet, and you have to exercise, and you have to sleep well, et cetera, et cetera. We're not particular good. We don't have an equivalent for that for the health of the mind and just having positive thoughts, and weeding out self-hating, unproductive thoughts. And so taking this back to law school, if you're have a heavy course load and you're working hard and you're just not getting the material and you're doing bad on the exams and you're just being very hard on yourself, and you're telling yourself, personally, the thoughts that would go in my mind is, you're not working as hard as these other people's because you're lazy and you're dumb, and you'll never be able to catch up to these people because you were too lazy at this point in your life. Maybe you're just not cut out for this type of work, et cetera, et cetera. And those thoughts, as I say, can be helpful to help motivate yourself, as long as it's backed up by actual action. So if you're just talking badly and it doesn't lead to anything, and so there isn't any improvement, there isn't any change in the way you're going about doing these things to improve, it's just going to be an escalating self-hatred-a-thon. And that's where, bad mental health, quote unquote, leads to depression and anxiety and stuff like that. So I think students should be keenly aware of, I think, that common type of experience of failure where things aren't going right, and it's uh, easy for someone with a type A personality to start being very hypercritical on themselves to the point of diminishing returns. So watch out for that. Really try to ask for help from those around you to see if you're dealing with the the uh, the failures and the disappointment and the adversity appropriately, and just staying in your head is very bad. It's been amazing to me, how much I don't know about myself until because someone else like points it out. Um, you know, I'm in my head 24/7, 365, obviously. I think I have an idea of the kind of person I am and the personality and the kind of characteristics I have, and it's amazing just the breadth of the ignorance you have for yourself when like someone points this out and you're like, oh yeah, they're right. Why didn't I notice that before? And this is one of the things that was hidden from me my first year of law school. I was like, someone else was like, wow, you're really you're really hard on yourself. And I was like, am I? I thought this is kind of like what everyone was going through, kind of like the duck syndrome, where everyone, a duck from above the water, it just looks nice and peace and calm and just floating carelessly on the pond. But if you look under, it's like feet are flailing, and that happens to a lot of students too, where everyone, looks very healthy, they look professional, they're speaking, articulating well, and no one knows that when we go to our apartments or in our dorms that we're all stressed and not all doing well. So yeah, keep that in mind. Just being aware of your psychology in response to failure, because you don't want that to snowball into something catastrophic. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, this is just a general intellectual thing that I find interesting during the week. Effing hell. Excuse me. And lately I've been thinking of what it means to think like a lawyer. That's often the answer to the question of what does law school teach students. They'll often say law school doesn't teach specific cases or laws, because the law is always changing. Law schools teach lawyers how to think, or rather to think like lawyers. And it's been a year now, and it's not too clear exactly what it means to me to think like a lawyer. I'd be interested to ask my fellow classmates what they think that activity means, or what you guys think that means. What does it mean to think like a lawyer? I can't describe it. It sometimes, especially when I'm with family and friends who are not lawyers, I could kind of see what they might mean, because since law school, you kind of filter things through a legal lens. You just can't help yourself sometimes. And there's some like trivial instances where like it's like you see something on TV and you're like, oh, I understand that better now. Or you see an accident on the freeway, and you're like, oh, there's gonna be someone might be sued, there might be litigation, and the attorneys for the plaintiffs are going to have to prove negligence, or just trying to think of mechanisms for finding liability. So something like that I have noticed in my thinking about the world, but I'm not sure exactly what that verb of lawyer thinking is. But aside from that, what I value highly intellectually is being able to think differently on whatever topic you're thinking about. Christopher Hitchens once said, or I think he said it in his the book Letters to a Young Contrarian. He says that it doesn't matter what you think about, it's how you think about it. And I think he really nailed that. And that's relevant to me because, yes, I want to be a lawyer. Yes, I want to be a good legal thinker, but I never want to be stuck in some narrow, confined way of thinking about the world. No matter how helpful it is, even how helpful it is when you're engaged in that type of discussion. If you're with your group of friends and you're discussing abortion, and you're the only individual there who has any legal knowledge, and you go about explaining your perspective, from your perspective, from a legal perspective, and that's interesting to a point. But even there, one would hope that the person who's giving the legal perspective is able to open up to different kinds of perspectives, a social or a biological or an economic perspective, and not being not only narrowly confined to looking at the world in a legal way, but also being, almost dogmatic to saying, oh, that's very interesting, your economics, your ethical talk, or your socio-cultural perspective, but really this comes down to the law, right? Because, eventually it's going to come to real world laws, and so my perspective is a superior perspective. That's, even worse than just not being able to get out of your box of ways of thinking. So I have that in mind as I go through law school. I want to be able to think like a lawyer, in whatever way that's understood, but at the same time being able to separate myself when I need to from that perspective. In my free time when I read, I do appreciate more the generalists, the Steven Pinker or the Bertrand Russell, or trying to think of more, Christopher Hitchens, as I mentioned, a Will Durant, these people who not only have mastered their individual discipline. For Pinker, it's linguistics, and for Hitchens, I guess you would say it's politics. For Durant, it's history, but they have a wide variety of knowledge on every human discipline, which allows them to come up with, I think, more insightful, more profound, more creative, and perhaps some more effective ideas on these topics. If you understand the arts, if you understand economics, if you understand the sciences especially, I think you're in a better position to give an opinion on anything. If you only come to a conversation, guest starring again, if you only come to a conversation being able to tune in to just one wavelength, I think you're severely intellectually handicapped. in that way. So there is that constantly in the back of my mind as I progress through my law school career. Just okay, let's no question be able to think like a lawyer, but I'm never going to be set on tethering myself to it to restrict my way of thinking. And yeah, that's what I've been thinking about this week. Interesting things, I think, for me at least. But that covers what I wanted to talk about. We not get off my outline. And yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. And I'll see you guys next week. See you guys.